Yeah, sure. You will have to share. Sure. 45 minutes. Okay. Okay. It's 45. No, hour and a half. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the panel, Roundtable Economic Freedoms and an Open Society, Opposites or a Necessary Pair. This roundtable is part of the thematic path, Let's Talk Liberalism, in the series of roundtables of ideas brought to you by the European Liberal Forum, the official political foundation of the ALDE party. So this event is also being live streamed on channels of the Freedom Games and also on the Facebook page of For Liberty EU, the European Liberal Forum, and also Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom. So I also want to welcome everyone watching us online. So today we are going to dive into the relationship between the contested concept of the open society and also economic freedom, between political rights and civil liberties on one hand, and also a market economy on the other. So we will explore the notion of openness of a society and also discuss the indicators that determine whether we could call ourselves economically free or not. Should we automatically assume if the personal freedom, that personal freedom and economic freedom always go hand in hand? And also, how does the rule of law influence both our personal and economic freedom? How can a pandemic influence our attitudes towards these two pillars? I'm Toni Skorić. I'm a project manager for Central Europe and Baltic states at the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom. And I'm looking forward to discussing these questions with Monika Budzák. She's program manager and analyst at the Institute of Economic and Social Studies, INESS from Slovakia. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Alexander Hammelburg, Dutch parliamentarian for the Social Liberal Party D66 and a spokesperson on foreign trade and development cooperation. Welcome. Miłosz Hodun, president of Project Polska Foundation in Warsaw and second vice president of the European Liberal Forum. Hi. Tanja Porčnik, president and co-founder of the Visio Institute from Slovenia and a co-creator of the Human Freedom Index. Andrea Virág, director of strategy at the Republikon Institute in Hungary, and Adrian Zwoliński, analyst at the Boym Institute based in Warsaw, in the field of macroeconomics and the economy of developing countries. So once again, welcome to the Freedom Games. In about an hour, we will open the floor for the questions from the audience here in Łódź. So I would like to invite you all to enrich our discussion and direct a question or two to our panelists. So I suggest we kick off our talk by offering a few definitions of the concepts before us. So there's a variety of meanings attached to the concept of an open society, and we don't exactly know what an open society is or should be. So also I would be interested to know how can we determine if we are economically free? So when exploring the relationship between the two concepts, one usually stumbles upon the articles that compare open society and open economies, political or personal freedom and economic freedom. Then we have democracy and market economies, or open society and free markets. So are we still talking about the same two terms, same two concepts? And in order to bring some clarity into this terminology and also consistency, I would suggest we do the following. So first, I would like to ask Miłosz and Andrea if you could briefly offer your definition of an open society. We'll start with Andrea.
Yes, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here again in person in Łódź, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. And thank you for the question. I think, yes, it's really difficult to really grab the meaning of these expressions, and of course everyone has their own interpretation, but to keep it brief, for me, open society is a society where everyone is free to live their lives the way they want, of course, without hurting each other. So, of course, the law is the law, but otherwise, you are free to express your opinion, to practice your religion, to love whoever you want, and so on. So for me, open society is the meaning of open society is something like this: when the government or the state they don't give rules to live your life in a certain way, a way that you don't want to.
Miłosz?
Also, thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be here in Łódź again in person. It's fantastic to see you, and thank you so much that you've chosen our panel, because there is a lot of panels to choose from, and thank you so much for being with us. My first association with the phrase open society is very simple. It's Soros, because of the Open Society Foundation, and but we are not going to talk about Soros. But Open Society Foundation, they take the name right from the book by publication by Karl Popper, Open Society and Its Enemies. And when I think about open society and the definition, I think that the definition that Karl Popper gave us in 1940s, it's actually still very, very updated. So according to him, of course, it's the easiest to say what open society is not, and it's the closed society, right? So this is a society that brings us closer to totalitarian regimes. Is the society that is all about militarization of the society. Is the society that is about censorship. It's about limiting our rights and freedoms, right? So these are the words from 1940s, but still very up to date, especially if you are looking at the Central European context, at the Polish context. But then what the open society is, and then again he gives us like this four features of what open society is, and I would say again this is something very updated. So he say that the four features of open society is freedom, it's the enhanced cooperation, it's the developing intelligence, and it's social progress. So I would say that for me, this is the open society, these four features.
Okay. Well, now we're going to go to the other side, and I would like to ask Adrian and Monika if you could offer us your definition of economic freedom. So, Monika, we'll start with you.
Again, thank you for having me. I really love the city, although I don't know how to pronounce the name. I believe it's Łódź, but it's great to be here and join this forum. I really like a simple definition of economic freedom, which says that you have the possibility to buy from and sell to a willing counterparty. And although it sounds very, very easy, if you think about it more in detail, you can identify several situations when state intervention somehow hinders these possibilities. To name an example, minimum wage laws are a hot topic right now in Slovakia. They are always negotiating in September, and they are rising. But this causes some problems in less developed regions of the eastern part of the country, when really low-skilled workers cannot access the labor market and sell their labor freely and legally, because the minimum wage is simply too high, and they don't have the productivity to match that wage. So that's a common example. But if you think also about entrepreneurship and what it takes to start a business in some countries and how hard it is to follow these rules, that's also an example how economic freedom is somehow restricted. And I think it's important to mention that economic freedom is a part of all the freedoms, or part of personal freedoms. And if you somehow restrict people from striving for their dreams and for their vocation, you also hinder or you also limit their personal freedom too. So that's
Perfect, thank you. And Adrian?
Thank you. Hello, thank you for the invitation. So I think I can provide you with two definitions, the short and briefly short. So extremely short. So the first one goes like that. economic freedom is about to exercise every single type of economic activity in a stimulus manner, but within the well-established rules like pacta sunt servanda, or prohibition of harassment, or you can't sell down of the range as top of the range, and obligation to inform about side effects of products or services, and so on. So the extremely short definition will be like that, that economic freedom is the essence of the game between being practical and being a poet, I think.
Perfect, thank you. So I hope that you, Tanja, and you, Alexander, will listening very carefully, because I would like to hear from you, based on these provided definitions, whether you will able to recognize some similarities or even incompatibilities between the definitions that were provided by two groups. We'll go with Alexander first.
Well, Toni, I can add so many more definitions. I'm a political scientist. I also studied political economy in the past, law, and all these different disciplines have different kinds of descriptions and definitions on economic, personal freedom, open society, and what have you. But I think we got the elements here pretty much right. But the essence of the claim that these two concepts are either enhancing each other or are opposites of each other, as in a black and white story without any shades of gray, I think that's a misconception. I think we are looking now at economic freedoms, we're looking at personal freedoms and all these different elements, but I think the essence of any story that we are creating here is and the analysis that we are making is that the human being and well-being of the individual person needs to be at the core of all our analysis. And this is something that is often missed in these more conceptual and political discussions. So I would like to add that element, and I think was it Soros, we will not speak about him, but also Popper and many, many other philosophers, political philosophers, were talking about agency and how it can enhance human well-being, but can also harm human well-being. And I would like to add that to both definitions here that were that I was missing still.
Perfect. Thank you, Tanja.
Thank you, Toni. So I think it was touched upon what is important. First, it's important to define a term, any term. And as it was alluded before, economic freedom is pretty well defined in the literature. It's also well measured by now. On the other side, even though Karl Popper defined it really well in 1948, as was mentioned by Miłosz, at the moment, we don't really measure that, and at the same time, the term, as it was alluded, means different things for different people, though on this panel, I heard similarities or things that were kind of adding to the story, which is when it comes to open society, it's first of all freedom, the first pillar that Popper spoke about. Then the second one is access to justice, or you can call it legal equality. You can then extend it to also rule of law in our modern society. And the third pillar he was talking about was values, which is whether values then transcend to constitutional norms. And this is where particularly we can talk about the difference between open society and oppressive society. So as he was already discussing, and then we have saw also in our Eastern Europe, oppressive societies when the government comes in and says, no, these are the values. We will tell you what your values are. And then the society says, no, these are not our values. So that's where I see the distinction. When it comes to economic freedom, we have measurements and we have clarity on that. And the speakers spoke very well on that.
Perfect. So as a co-creator of the Human Freedom Index, you had the opportunity also to study the scientific literature dealing with this relationship between economic freedom and open society. And also, so I would be interested to know, what does this literature says us about this relationship, and also regarding the indexes, could you provide us a short overview of the indexes measuring these two concepts, and what do they show us? What can we learn from them?
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we don't have yet index of open society. Again, because no one took himself or herself to the task of first defining and then measuring within those parameters, I guess. But if it's defined by these three pillars, I would say freedom, access to justice, or rule of law, and then liberal values, we could probably measure it. And that was one of the tasks that we had. That was the main task when we decided to go and measure human freedom, which was never before it was measured to the extent that we wanted to measure it. So first we wanted to define the term and then also to measure it, which was a huge endeavor. So now all scholars can actually analyze the relationship between human freedom and within, of course, different types of freedoms, and then also with other variables, like rule of law. We have a wonderful index of the Rule of Law Index by the World Justice Project, and there are many studies that have been done which show positive relationship between human freedom and rule of law. Then you have also many studies, scientific studies and other expert studies that show positive relationship between economic, if we are talking about economic freedom, between economic freedom and liberal democracy, like political rights. We also see positive relationship to other like well-being indicators. So literature is there, but first there has to be an index, there has to be a compositive index or an indicator that measures a specific thing before it can be analyzed. So if we want to see studies on this relationship or any other relationship with the open society, we would first have to have an indicator.
Well, I suggest that we offer a few specific examples of how economic freedom can influence personal freedom and vice versa. So I have checked the latest edition of the Human Freedom Index, and in all of the countries represented here, so we have Slovakia, Netherlands, Poland, Slovenia, Hungary, Poland again, I see that personal freedom and economic freedom go more or less hand in hand, with, of course, personal freedom being at a slightly higher level than economic freedom. So the rule of law is always mentioned as a condition for freedom, and also is being measured in both Index of Economic Freedom by the Heritage Foundation and also the Human Freedom Index by the Cato Institute. And when I saw the scores in the Human Freedom Index, I see that both Poland and Hungary rank especially low in the category of the rule of law, and that this score has been deteriorating consistently in the last couple of years. So I would be interested to hear from Miłosz and Andrea, how does the rule of law influence our economic freedom and also our personal freedom, or in your country specifically? So we can start maybe with Miłosz first.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is very interesting what Tanja just said, and these rankings are very interesting, and actually we can probably also, it will be somebody who will create the open society ranking, because why not? It's also something that's very clickable, I believe, like many rankings, but the key is the methodology, and it's very important, I think what you said, is that if we look at the methodology of both the rankings that you just mentioned, which are, I think, predominantly rankings focused on economic freedoms, the first pillar you see in their methodology is actually the rule of law. So the authors of these rankings, they say, yes, if we want to measure how free the economy is, the first thing we should look at is the rule of law. And this is, and I believe this is very true, and we should do it exactly like that. And there is a few lessons that we can learn from them. One is that there is a free, open society is not possible without the rule of law, without good institutions, without working institutions, especially in the field of the judiciary. And the second one is that that I believe that the better the institutions are, the better the economy can be. So by creating good framework of the legal system, of the justice system, but also in the state institutions in general, we create better framework for the development of the economy. And I think this is very visible in Poland, as you said. In Poland, since the democratic transition, so since the early 90s, we had always an issue with the effectiveness of our justice system, always. So this is not the thing that we've been experiencing in the last years only. The question about the effectiveness of the courts was always a question on the agenda. And this is what this rankings show, but also many other researchers, what they say is that investors, money likes safety. Like money likes to be invested in places where the court system, when the justice system is effective. So this has been for 30 years or so also a problem with the Polish democracy. The fact that the court system could have always been improved. Because why? Because if it's not improved, the key investments. They do not come to the country when it's not good enough, and it's especially true in the sectors that are non-material manufacturing. So with the new technologies, with high tech, this is especially important to have an effective modern court system, and this is the problem we've had. Plus, after 2015, we have the new problem, a very very dangerous one, even more one. We're not talking any longer about the effectiveness of the court and the fact that this government has nothing to offer about how to improve the effectiveness of the court. Everything they are offering these days in the area of the justice system is all about replacing the people with the people who are fully dependent on the party. So before, the problem was the effectiveness of the court, but something that the democratic society and the democratic government could step by step improve. But now we're talking about the lack of independence of the court, and this is so far away from talking just about the effectiveness. If we don't have the effectiveness, we will lose some investments. If we don't have independent courts, we can really, the economy, the development may collapse, and it will have terrible consequences for the future. Knowing that we are in the European Union, we are not surrounded by, we're in this democratic environment, and we're competing with other countries who are improving in this rankings of the rule of law, and we are going down all the time.
Okay. So the country that is lower than yours, Miłosz, is Hungary. So Andrea, would you like to continue on the same question?
Yes, thank you. I completely agree with Miłosz, and I think it's, of course, not a coincidence that all these indexes are starting with the state of rule of law. And if you look at Hungary, you see that if you don't have rule of law, you won't have economic freedom either, or vice versa. So they go hand in hand, I think. And the thing with Hungary is, what you see is that, unfortunately, a big part of the population accept that the government will meddle in their life. So the government will tell society what family means. They kind of accept that. Of course, not everyone, but there's not a huge uproar. Also, they will accept Fidesz and the government to control the economy in the way they want. And I think what might be a bigger problem in Hungary than in Poland is corruption, and how the government wants to channel every fund and every money to their clientele, basically. So if you have, you have many big constructions in Hungary, but you can argue whether they are the right investments or not. So whether you want to build another football stadium or you want to build a hospital, but it's all decided on a government level. So it's not based on the market. It's based on what the government wants, and also which the other problem is with these constructions, that they are all conducted by big government-affiliated corporations. So basically, what Fidesz is doing with the economy in Hungary, without me being an economic expert, but what Fidesz is doing is controlling the economy in a way that is beneficial for them and for their family and for their friends, and at the same time with social policies targeting specific groups that they need for staying in power. So before the elections, they are targeting right now young people from 20 to 25 or other groups as well. So, but the main reason for their economic policies is always to stay in power, which is, of course, a problem.
And Monika, Slovakia ranks especially low in the area of property rights and legal enforcement of contracts. So even though this category is attributed to economic freedoms, I would be interested to know how can protection of property rights and legal enforcement of contracts influence our personal freedom?
Yeah, I would like to start with emphasizing again the link between personal freedoms and economic freedom. I mean, when you control labor in an extreme way, we are talking about slavery. You cannot talk about economic freedom, and you cannot talk about personal freedom either. When we are going back to communism, the state controlled a lot of economic activity as well, and it controlled, for example, capital flows or prices. And many people think that when the state controls prices, it doesn't control people. But if you think about it more in detail, people were not allowed to meet on a market and negotiate a price, but the state did. So the state controlled the price and the people as well. So this is something that should be mentioned, and of course, politicians often misuse these terms because they're talking, for example, of regulating businesses, but businesses are people as well. So I think it's crucial to have forums like this to emphasize this. And going back to the rule of law and property rights example, we are lucky enough to have a relatively good constitutional court. And property rights are protected in the Constitution. So the Constitution says that property rights of citizens have to be protected by law. And we, just to name an example, we had this case about 3 years ago that there was a law which stated how agricultural land could be sold. And mostly agricultural land is owned by ordinary people, so almost every Slovak has some plots because it's very scattered and fragmented and so on. And this law was very strict, so everyone should follow a very strict process in case he wants to sell his plot. And this caused many side effects, like land prices were very low and people were just keeping their piece of land because it wasn't as profitable for them to sell it to people who could use it more effectively. And the Constitutional Court recognized this and abolished this law because it really hindered economic freedoms as well as property rights and so on. So we are fortunate enough that the Constitution works and protects property rights, and the Constitutional Court works as well. So that's an example.
Well, I would like to avoid selecting the worrying trends only. So I will also like to point out some positive trends which are happening in Netherlands. So, for example, in the area of freedom of expression, belief, and assembly, as well as in the area of personal autonomy and individual rights, that very much contribute to this idea of an open society. So, Alexander, my question to you is, how can personal freedoms like civil liberties, personal autonomy, and individual rights also contribute to our economic freedom or to Dutch economy in general?
Right. Well, I think since the crisis in the 1930s and everything, the poverty, the sheer poverty in the Netherlands, and the riots, and then the Second World War, and the devastating impact on not only people, but also the economy, which was decimated like many places in Europe, I think the Netherlands basically really adopted the idea, in contrast to other countries, specifically in the eastern side of the divide of Europe. They embraced the very idea that all sorts of freedoms are interconnected, basically. So in the Dutch case, that really worked. So you saw a fantastic historical development of rising economies, steady growth, some crisis here and there, gains of personal freedoms. And it's still not being studied properly if that was super connected or not, if it was actually connected or not, but they definitely enhanced each other. But I can't stay positive at this point because I think we're at a crossroads, also in the Netherlands. And I think everything that is happening in Poland or Hungary is not a Polish or Hungarian affair. I think it's a European trend, and I think it's a worldwide trend that freedoms in broader sense, so the economic freedoms, but also the personal freedoms, all kinds of freedoms are under attack. The latest elections in the Netherlands have actually attested to this. We have seen in the last elections in March that the political divides are, the fragmentation is humongous. We have 19 political parties in the Netherlands in parliament right now, divided over only 150 seats. So the largest party, the Liberal Conservative Party, has 34, 35 seats. I'm part of the second party, we only have 24 seats. So power is fragmented in that sense as well. Now the question is, what are these new parties and these smaller parties that are taking up those seats in Dutch parliament? They're mostly actually seated on the right side and the extreme right side of Dutch parliament, and this is new. So you see political parties that are actually teaming up with the ruling parties in Hungary and Poland, and they are adopting the same rhetorics, attacking personal freedoms, LGBTI rights, they're attacking women's rights, they're reintroducing discussions on abortion, which we thought in the Netherlands was a past station basically a long time ago. They have been attacking the biggest opposition party on the right, on the extreme right, I would say, I have to be careful a little bit with the terminology because we are online, is attacking judges and the justice system. So we're facing also in the Netherlands a dangerous times where we have to combat these attacks on personal freedoms, on economic freedoms, because in the Netherlands case, the Dutch case, they actually proved to be mutually reinforcing. I won't go as far because I am also a political scientist and I also study political economy a little bit, that this is definitely a given for every context in every country, but in the Netherlands it worked perfectly, basically, and we have to protect it.
Well, it has often been mentioned that open societies need open markets, and also that political freedoms go hand in hand with economic freedoms. But how can we explain the countries in which personal freedom is, for example, much higher than the economic freedom, for example, in Sweden and Norway, and those countries in which economic freedom is lower, in those countries that rank high in economic freedom and low in personal freedom, like, for example, Singapore and Malaysia. My question for Adrian would be also, if we take a look at the different types of openness, how can we explain the country that are maybe more open in this socio-cultural and constitutional aspect, or closed, but more open in this economic aspects, for example, China?
Okay, so few things and very little time. So, okay. First thing, Sweden. I can't entirely agree with you that Sweden has a low level of economic freedom. It's much more complex to me. I think, look at the history. Sweden benefited for a very long time from its liberal reforms. Then in the 70s and the 60s comes socialist rules, and then even now, despite the large share of government size or sometimes irrational social care system, Sweden is ranked as a 22nd country in the Freedom Economic Index. So only one place behind the United States, and a few places higher than Poland, for example. So I think that it's not really 0-1 case. Singapore. Singapore is another very interesting situation. Singapore, the poor in a Handrom country, has been expelled from Malay Federation in 1965. And it seems that it mentioned, and it seems that Singapore have to prioritize. Sorry for that. For my special, have to prioritize its goals if we are talking about opening society. So the first goes like that Singapore had to care about peaceful coexistence of many ethnic groups, for example, Malays, for example, Chinese and Indians. The second was to dismiss the dark menace of communism, and Singapore did it. So, so it was kind of historical struggle for Singapore to make the open society in its own terms. China, because you asked me about the China. Very interesting case, because of course that there was an opening in the China economy. It was enough to leverage thousands of people from the poverty, but it was an opening as far as it was possible in the communist environment. So yes, there was a Deng Xiaoping reform in 1979. There was an entrepreneurship reform in 80s. There was a capital market reform in 90s. But in the same time, the Communist Party had and has, in fact, a very strong grip on the Chinese economy. So, so we had some tragedy like Tiananmen Square massacre, or to arrest dissidents who were co-authors of Charter 08, which was the Freedom Declaration. Also, we have something like removing, on the other hand, we have something like removing some provisions from criminal code of Chinese criminal code. So there was one hand and another, but still it was a communist authoritarian country. And now our eyes are peeled on Xi Jinping rule, who narrow both freedom, economic freedom and personal freedoms. So, so to sum up, I think that, yes, there is a link between economic freedom and personal freedoms, open society. But sometimes we have to remember about some non-economical factors like history or culture, which interfere this hand-in-hand relation.
So we're going to stay on China for a little bit. How do you explain also some behavior of some member countries here in the EU where they feel this lure of China in economical sense, but they're ready to squint on the one eye when it comes to personal freedoms? Maybe Alexander.
I think you were right, actually, saying that maybe 90 minutes is not long enough to explore all the different things that we are probably thinking right now, and I think also in the public, we'll see with the Q&A. I think we should go back a little bit with the threat that I believe that countries like China are actually posing by pretending to the world that they are the success story, showing that guiding in a friendly way, guiding economic freedoms and personal freedoms are actually the way to proper development. If you go to Shanghai, you see fantastic affluence and it's a fantastic city, but you don't see what's happening behind the walls of all those factories, basically modern slavery, I would say. So I don't think China is a success story. Let me start with this. But I see that some governments in the EU are attracted to the idea, also in Eastern Europe are attracted by the idea, and they're actually they're receiving support by the Chinese government more and more for infrastructural projects. And I think it's a dangerous assumption because it shows, and I think also the immediate gain, for instance, for the large companies in the Hungarian context, as you were mentioning, are leading to economic growth, which also leads to job growth. But in the long term, it kills innovation and startups of small companies, and it harms the economy. I think blaming judges for being political, as parties in Poland and the Netherlands are doing, in the end, guides us to, maybe in the short term, it gives people a good feeling or something, and something is changing back to the good old days. But in the end, I think it will harm trust, and also, by that, harming companies to actually invest in a country. By which the economy is harmed in the next decade or so. So I think this whole Chinese example and how there could be an alternative to the European example of economic and personal freedoms is actually super dangerous for the long term, and it will not work out. And people just have to go to China to understand and to properly look in China to see how bad things are with human rights and how bad things are for most Chinese people still in China. It's not only the happy few that you see in the nice movies, but if you go to Xinjiang and you look at what's happening with the slavery and the genocide, but also if you go to the suburbs of Shanghai, you see a totally different picture, and it's not a pretty one.
So maybe I would like to come back to Europe and also to our region, and I suggest we take a look at how political landscape, also voter behavior and current developments, what they can tell us about how people see this relationship between economic freedoms and open societies. So. Alexander, you already mentioned something about a fragmentation of the Dutch political system, but I would like to also hear about you. How do these parties, there are a lot of them, 19 in the parliament, if I'm not mistaken. So how do these political parties, but also voters, see this relationship right now between economic freedoms and open society?
I think most people don't actually consider these concepts in the way on the day they go out to cast their vote. But we do see that development since the 70s, the 60s, and the 70s in the Netherlands have been crazy. I mean, economic development has been huge, but also opening up to the world, globalization, migration. The world and the Netherlands have changed. Even if you look at the landscape and the way things are going with the development of cities, the expansion of cities, infrastructure, it's a lot to deal with. The digital revolution, for instance. So most people, lots of people in the Netherlands, I wouldn't say most people, but lots of people in the Netherlands and in many other countries in the world, I don't think this is a Dutch story, by the way, are actually they have the feeling they're losing grip. They're losing control over the way they live, the way their environment is controlled by them. And their understanding, and I think that's the right one, of democracy and democratic control is that you actually, by casting your vote, you can control control society and the way it's shaped. And they have the feeling that it's not the case anymore. So their feeling that they're truly living in democracy is declining, and the trust in democracy by that is declining. And this is exactly where all these political parties are, these new political parties are actually trying to get power. And it's not based on ideas, it's based on fear, it's based on lies, it's based on feeding them mistrust, basically, and aggravating that. So they're attacking the political cartel of the old parties. They're attacking the judges, the justice system. They're basically attacking teachers for teaching their children something wrong. They're blaming journalists. There was a huge debate last week about one of the biggest of such parties actually attacking journalists for them spreading lies. So they're actually tapping into this mistrust and everything that is established, and by that trying to take power, and they're succeeding. So I just wanted to, by this story, also show that the Netherlands, even though people, and I don't want to be pessimistic, and I hope the Dutch are not going to kill me when I return to Amsterdam tomorrow morning, but I think the Dutch are very much part of Europe more than they actually believe, and I think what we are facing right now is a European threat to freedoms. And we need to create awareness around this, and we need to gain back that trust. We need to post a different story of development, and this is something that people are still not understanding. And I think the basis is that people want back their control. They want their control back. They want to see that where they used to be able to provide for their family with one income, now they need two incomes and sometimes even three incomes. We need to combat inequalities that are growing, and I think when we are talking, and then I'm going back, Toni, and I'm rounding up on economic freedoms and open society, I think one of the misconceptions here for them to go hand in hand, as in the Dutch story, is that we need to believe in the pure market freedom, for instance, without making any rules. We need to lower taxes so that economic growth will increase, that we will get more jobs. But at the same time, what we're seeing is rising inequality. So we need to address this without attacking the free market economy. We need to cherish that, but we need to also understand that those inequalities need to be addressed, and we need to maybe look a little bit at the economic freedoms to curtail them and I think we need to work with this with European countries to basically say we need to work on our taxation, the minimum of taxation. We need to make sure that the rules of engagement are fair and they are decreasing the inequalities that have been rising in the last 10, 20 years.
Sure. And Miłosz, question to you, the same question to you goes, but I would also like to hear from you, maybe to be more specific. How does the Polish youth react to this relationship between economic freedom and open societies?
The Polish youth, this is a big topic, and but yeah, after the Dutch introduction, I think it's so interesting because in the Netherlands there is something that we are missing here, and is the culture, the political culture, and this is something that we've been learning but for 30 years, but still Polish system because of that is so vulnerable for all these influences, for all these tendencies, global tendencies, right? This is not Polish thing, this is not Eastern European thing, this is a global thing, and I think our populists, they're learning really quickly from the West, from the United States of America, when the populists are really exploring all these possibilities, and they are using all means to win the elections because this is part of their cultural belief, and they are also implementing parts of these practices in here in a system without really well-established political parties, without values that are apparently not shared by everybody. So this is just one comment. And if we come to the youth, it's I think again Poland is a part of the global trend if it comes to the youth. The youth is radical. The youth votes radical, and actually it's a good question now because we had a poll. There was a research done by one of the big institutes, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, about the party support of the youth, and the winner was the same. Like for many months already, is the far right Konfederacja, the Confederation, and it's something that we've been observing, for months really before the last elections. Also, they were winning all this pre-voting in schools that they have, where the youth can vote, which is just to show them the mechanism of democracy. And before the elections, the Confederacja, so the far right, they won the elections also. So to win the support of Polish youth, you need to be you need to offer really simple solutions. And this is what what Polish far right, what Confederacja does. What's very interesting right now with this leader of this polls among the youth is that they are actually economically very liberal. They are very libertarian, even economically. Even though Confederacja is not a party, it's a block of parties or block of parties associations, and they are very different. The general economical tone is set by the wing of the party that is very libertarian. So they are attractive also for entrepreneurs. And but in my opinion, we can definitely not call them liberals because they are absolutely lacking all the cultural liberal aspect, right? So they are extremely liberal or libertarian if it comes to the economy, but then if it comes to all cultural aspects, they are extremely conservative. They are they are far right, at its best anti-Semite, including one of the leaders is like very well known anti-Semite. So this is this type of party, but what they offer is very simple solutions to all the answers, right? And many young people like that, and they polled 25%. Also very interesting, I think, trend the lesson coming from this poll. We have this new movement association called Agrounia in Poland, which is this new agrarian, also very populist movement, who are the people who are blocking the streets. We don't really know their agenda, the general agenda, but we know the leader, we know the style. And again, this is a very simple language, very simple solutions, very much talking about the force and about kicking people out from the offices and using the wheelbarrows to move them out from their offices. So this is something that's very attractive for young voters. Yeah, a question: what should we do with it? I guess this is beyond this 90 minutes we are having.
Sure. Well, it's a long panel, 90 minutes, but still we don't have enough time, so you can imagine. So Andrea, I think I'm not mistaken that Republikon did this spring research specifically on the voters' behavior or attitudes. So could you maybe, on this relationship between maybe free markets and also open societies, could you please maybe share a couple of findings from that research?
Yes, sure. I will tell you some data from our research in a minute, but let me start from another place. As Miłosz talked about the heritage of Polish political culture, I think it's important to mention the Hungarian heritage of how society sees economic freedom and political freedom. And in Hungary, the heritage of the communist era is very heavily feelable nowadays as well, and people expect the government to barge in and solve their problems and tell them what they have to do and what they need to do. And another thing is what I think it's very important to mention, and it didn't come up yet, so I might just throw it in there, is education, which is in Hungary is a very problematic field, and I think education would have a huge role in open the eyes of the youngest generation to be independent, to make their own decisions. But the Hungarian education system is very much based on authority. So you need to listen to the teacher and do what he or she tells you to do. Of course, there are good examples and exceptions, but the main rule is that the teacher will stand in front of you and tell you the data, tell you a very dry kind of knowledge, and you just have to learn it. There is no group work, no individual work, nothing that teaches young kids to take responsibility and make their own decision. And I think it's very problematic because when they grow up, they don't have the skill set and they don't have really the desire and they don't have the example how society can work when you are not told what to do, but rather think about what you want to do and execute what you want to do. So I just wanted to mention that because I think it's very important, and I will get to this research that you mentioned. Actually, it was conducted one of our Hungarian partners, and the special thing about this research was its sample size, which is actually 5,000 people, which is far better than a regular 1,000 respondents research, so the data is a bit more reliable with this huge sample size. And yes, we had some questions about the attitudes towards certain economic questions, and it was really interesting to see. Of course, we know that in Hungary, economic right or economic liberalism doesn't really exist. So every party in Hungary is leftist in an economic sense. Of course, there are far leftist parties or more to the center, but basically, if you look at the economy, they are all left-leaning. I think everyone who studied political science met with this classic two-dimension system where you have the cultural left-right and the economic left-right, and you put the parties in that two-dimensional system. And in Hungary, you have all the parties in the economic left. So Fidesz is a very, I think, confused party economically. As I said, their main idea is to to stay in power. But they were the ones to introduce the flat tax rate in Hungary, which actually is a very liberal thing to do. And all of the opposition parties are criticizing Fidesz for that. So you see the paradox situation in Hungary with that. And the reason behind this is that the voters actually have a very leftist view on the economy. So just to give you a few data, we asked the respondents whether they agree that in Hungary we should or they should introduce some kind of universal basic income. And actually 53% of the whole population agreed. And we did a breakdown according to ideology. So, and we looked, of course, at liberal voters, and it's the same, 53%. So even if they identify themselves as liberal, it's more of a cultural thing, not an economic thing. The same, 53% of Hungarian liberals agree that there should be a universal basic income in some kind of way. Also, an overwhelming majority agrees that the government should spend more on social security policies. Is more than 80%, both among the total population and both among liberals. They agree that education, also of course lower levels of education and higher levels of education should be free. They agree that the government should spend more on healthcare. 85% agreed with that. Of course, COVID it's a huge factor in that, but even before COVID, it would have been the same. So you see that there is overwhelming support for government intervention in every aspect of life, including, of course, economics, and even those who identify themselves as liberals. It's 14% in Hungary who picked liberals at first place. If you look at the economic attitudes of those, you see a very leftist picture.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because specifically now during the COVID-19 pandemic, we could observe voices that maybe request more involvement from the government into the economic affairs are getting louder. So I'll be interested to know, Monika, in Slovakia, how did the pandemic influence the attitudes of the Slovaks towards the concept of economic freedoms and also open society in general?
First of all, I have to say that COVID hit Slovakia very strongly. I mean, especially during the second wave, we had many victims, more than 12,000. So it was a very tough time for the country. But even when it all started in spring 2020, we had very few cases and almost no victims. But people started to talk about food self-sufficiency as a relevant policy goal, and there were many voices in the public which somehow called for being the state self-sufficient in food supplies. So although this is something that occurs in the political debate often and occurred in the past as well, but the pandemic really emphasized this. And after 1 year, we have the empirical evidence that actually not the state, but a functioning international market and free market helped to sustain food supplies, and we didn't need self-sufficiency in case of food supplies to manage such situations. But people still believe in this idea and still bring it up in the public debate, and of course politicians as well, because they want to gain power. And yeah, we also published a study on self-sufficiency to somehow address these myths related to this issue. And that's why I also appreciate forums like this, that we can talk about it, and that we see that it wasn't the case of the state that helped to manage the pandemic better, but it was the case of functioning international markets. And if we also take a look at, for example, state reserves, Slovakia also holds some state reserves in case of food and protective equipment and so on. We had a very funny situation at the beginning of the pandemic, because we recognized that there are no masks in the stores, which were state-owned. So actually the state, or people were calling for the state to help to manage the situation, but the state was not prepared. And that's also the case. I mean, also state reserves are quite common in many countries, like in Germany, for example. And there is often this type of criticism that although the stores are full, so the state reserves are prepared or are having protective equipment and food and so on, but there is no real plan how to distribute these goods to people in need in case of a crisis. And free markets and international logistics is very sophisticated, and they managed to handle this pandemic perfectly. So that's something we really need to emphasize during this crisis.
The next question, Tanja, is also for you. A similar question regarding the pandemic and the attitudes of the Slovene people towards these two pillars. But also, I would be interested to know if you compare it today with, let's say, 10 years ago, the attitudes toward the same two concepts. How would you describe that?
Yeah, this question taps into what Miłosz and Andrea were saying before about the importance of education. However, I would emphasize that education is not only important when we talk about the youth, but also the entire population, especially decision makers. In our case, I would say that when it comes to economic freedom, I don't know if we were at the same level as Hungary is right now, but I can say that 10 years ago, there was really not much of appreciation for economic freedom in Slovenia, or understanding what does it mean, how does it benefit other aspects of society, what are the positive relationship between economic freedom and other measurements that we discussed earlier. So what many of us did, basically, when we acknowledged that the decision makers particularly don't have this knowledge, we were like, okay, we have to inform them. And this comes back to open society. They were willing to get this information, and they were willing to look for the truth. I think this is one of the things that we should mention here when we talk about open society, which is not just free flow of information, of knowledge, of ideas, so we discuss things, but that actually people seek the truth, seek that, proof of something, that actually they don't get gratitude in believing something just for sake of believing, which is kind of problem right now with, all these anti-vaccine, what we are facing, and also populists, what we were talking before, which is people started believing something just because someone said it, not because this is the truth or this is accepted scientifically. So going back to what I was saying earlier, which is we decided that we need to do something about people understanding and appreciating economic freedom. And it did turn. And it goes back to the question, what is economic freedom? Economic freedom is not only having relatively low taxes. So some Eastern European countries thought, okay, if we're going to reduce taxes, this is it. Also, China sold itself, we're going to do a couple of things, and then we are proponents of economic freedom. Well, not really. If you still have state owning most of the economy or large share of it, if you're meddling with decisions of the entrepreneurs, if you're restricting them in various ways, like regulatory, then you don't have economic freedom. If you don't have rule of law, if you don't protect property rights, which is, of course, the problem in China, and also, as discussed earlier, in Eastern Europe, we did not learn from Western Europe how to strengthen rule of law. And if we don't learn to do that, we will lose all advances that we have seen in economic freedom. So coming back to Slovenia, I would say that we have seen this progress of people and decision makers appreciating economic freedom and actually working toward changing policies, institutions to support economic freedom. Because economic freedom is not only enabling people to trade, exchange with each other, but also having strong institutions that support possible infringement of those relations. So if something happens, there has to be rule of law to protect the people.
Perfect, thank you. So we've taken a trip through your countries right now, and I suggest that we close this section. And now would be a good time to open the floor for our audience here in Łódź. So I would like to ask you, if you have any questions for our panelists, please raise your hand and also state your name. And yes, the microphone will come to you immediately. It's coming. So, yeah.
Hi, my name's Jacob. I'm Polish. I'm from Warsaw. And thank you for your very interesting panel, really. I have a few points, but maybe the most important is why do you think there is a lack of trust in the liberal viewpoint? Because from my point of view, the populist movements, they're just, they're popular because people want them to be popular, because they're replying to the popular demand. Yeah, so basically this. Thank you.
Okay, is there any specific person you want to ask this question to?
No, general.
Okay, then I will say maybe Alexander.
Well, it was also part of my story and the context that I was giving from the Netherlands. We had a true belief in our success story, and I think it was a success story. So the highlights were in the 1990s. Our system basically won from the clash of civilizations, the end of what was it? The end of history, Fukuyama. There was a true belief in the Netherlands that our system, economic, personal freedoms, and growth was fantastic. So we all believed it. And then we had a few crises. And then there was the digital revolution. There was a rise in migration that led to destabilizing factors, basically. And I think the political parties, including mine, by the way, were basically sleepy a little bit. We were not seeing what was happening with people in the economic space. People were losing, basically, I'm always trying to find the word in English for this, the value of your income, basically, and the way you saw that previous generations of your parents, actually, their income basically grew, and their well-being grew, and they were able to go on holidays all of a sudden and buy a second car. And now we find ourselves in the new generation where you can't even pay your rent based on one income. Buying a house is basically impossible. No one has money to afford a car anymore, specifically when you live in the city. So that has changed tremendously, and I think it's one of those reasons that people are saying, wait a minute, everything was going so well. This whole system, the liberal system that is based on growth and wealth, companies becoming bigger because it gives you more jobs, so that's good for everyone. That whole very liberal concept, I think, is losing ground very fast. And we need to address those inequalities to save the liberal system, because if we lose the liberal system, then we go to all other alternatives, and those are not good. We know that from history. So basically, we need to find those shades of gray again, and we need to attack the rising inequality. I think this is the answers, the premises of people losing trust in democracy, because they have no control anymore, and their incomes are basically going down.
Would anyone like to add to that? Miłosz?
Sure. This is a very good question, and something that I think at least a couple of us, we've been working a lot. And of course, there is no one simple answer, but there is a few answers that we've tried already. Like, for me, so first, one of the answers that is a global trend, and out of a sudden, like the most powerful man on planet, is part of this trend. And I think people all over the world, like leaders, some leaders, they see, okay, so now it's allowed, now we can do it. Now things that were maybe dirty and kind of, we really should not do it before. Now they see, okay, he's doing it, they are doing it, so we can also do it. So I see that this is part of the problem. Other part of the problem is, of course, I think the weak institutions and lack of interest in by so many governments before to fix the institutions. And this is already a populistic way of thinking, right? Being very, what is populism? For me, one of the most important dimensions of populism is being short-sighted. So only looking as far as the next election cycle. And I think many parties who we do not call populist, they've been doing this kind of politics for years, and this is why our institutions were not being improved. And going back to Karl Popper, the institutions, this is really the basis, and this includes the education, something that was already mentioned, like. The system of education makes the society vulnerable. The fact that in this country, critical thinking in school is not something that is much appreciated. It's not really part of the. I don't say it's not the part of the curriculum, because of course there's many fantastic teachers also who are doing that. But it's not the part of the general idea about the way we think about education, or the ministry thinks, is the contrary. So like this is not appreciated, and with the government we are having now, it's the contrary. The curriculum they are creating, the system they are creating, is to multiply populist voters, right? Is that the entire system is now being created, and the curriculum basically to create more voters of law and justice, because so they should be interested in certain topics, but also they shouldn't ask too many questions. This is the way that populists multiply themselves, and I think we can find also many deficiencies in many other countries that were also speeding up this process of making us vulnerable towards populism. And just the very last thing I would like to stress is the fact that I think many people were left behind, and were left behind on so many levels. Economically, this is one thing, but even culturally, there was the, and I don't want to say the elite, but there were people who were benefiting from the system. They were benefiting from the globalization, and we were living in cities that are growing. The standard of our life was also growing. But there were so many people living in Poland, especially in the countryside, in small locations, and nobody cared. Nobody listened. So of course this is like this self-accusation, because I feel I'm a part of this liberal bubble who is all against this populism, but when the populists came, when they took the power, I think we realized something, at least some of us, and this is a lesson that we must learn from. We must learn from the fact that some people were left behind, they felt left behind, and Peace and other populists, they knew how to reach those people. They knew how to listen to their problems. They knew how to make them feel listened, and they offered some solutions. And we can discuss about the solutions. They're populist. They are wrong, in my opinion. But they reached the people who nobody listened before. And I think it's the same with Trump. This was the fact. This was the main reason why Trump won, because he offered solution to the people who were not listened to. And this is our big failure. And this is something that we have to do about, because inclusion to me is also one of the most important things in open society. Open society is inclusive, and open society, going back to my first sentence, the synonym for me for open society, there are two synonyms of open society to me. It's liberal democracy and it's critical thinking. Without critical thinking, we'll be so vulnerable towards everything that populists are doing.
Perfect, thank you. Anyone else, or we do have one more question, but please make it short because we are running out of time. So, sir, over there, I believe you are.
I don't have a microphone.
Oh.
Thank you. My name is Feiko van Loon. I'm from the Netherlands. The question I have is, why don't you mention the negative sides of economic liberalism? Isn't the growing inequality the growing power of large enterprises like Amazon, etc., isn't that part of the problem of isn't that part of what is causing populism? Yeah, in short.
You should have said that also, you said.
Well, there's a little...
Can just take the mic.
30 seconds, because I also saw you responding, but since we're from the same country, and I was sharing all this news from the Netherlands, which still doesn't make me left-wing, by the way. I'm right in the middle. And I believe in the market economy, but yes, the race to the bottom when it comes to taxation, the power of the large multinational companies that bring the world a lot of beautiful stuff, by the way, and lots of innovation and jobs, and they do good stuff. They also do a lot of bad stuff to the environment, to general income, and they do a lot of tax evasion. So this is something we need to combat. And it was only last week in Dutch Parliament where we started discussing this again with the Minister of Finance, saying, go to Europe and talk about this worldwide and make sure that we have agreements on what we do with this. Thankfully, this summer, they started already with a minimum in tax, right? So it's a global initiative. 134 countries are now actually signing up to this, excluding Hungary and Estonia and Ireland in the EU, by the way. So this is a major concern. But for instance, just making sure that companies are paying the taxes in those countries where they're making their profits so they can reinvest that money. We can reinvest that money in infrastructure, which is important for the economy, in education, which is important for the economy, and personal freedoms is super important. And this is something in the current system that is going wrong. And people see this, and this is also why they're losing their trust. I absolutely agree with that analysis.
Okay, Tanja, and then Adrian.
Thank you. So not to take away anything what was said, so I would like to go back to the definition of economic freedom, which a lot of people actually think it is capitalism, or it is about multinational companies, or it's about greed of the biggest. Actually, economic freedom is what also as individuals, of course, as also legal entities, when we interact with each other, or when they interact with other legal entities, or of course individuals. So it is not reserved for those big companies. When we talked about economic freedom, actually economic freedom starts from individual, like all of us, in order to be able to be interacting. So from that point on, I can speak about scientific literature. So if you take economic freedom and reduction of poverty, there is a clear positive relationship, meaning more economic freedom would, in general, bring bigger reduction of poverty. Now, what you alluded to is really something else, which kind of does tie to economic freedom in a sense, but it ties more to economic activity of a certain type of a company. And then the answer would be those questions. So I wouldn't bring these two things together. Like I would in a very narrow aspects, and then we can definitely discuss what was pointed out to.
Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you. Two kind of things. First, about inequality, because you have mentioned the problem with the qualities. So yes, we have a problem with equality, but the problem goes also like that. We don't really know the level of inequalities, because it depends on, very often, it depends on the methodology. So if we go from the country to country, there is a problem with identify the level of inequalities because of the different methodologies. So we have different outcomes. On the other side, from the, for example, some regionals or global aspect, inequalities decreased over the last 30 or 50 years. So, classical, it depends. Secondly, the best options for the economic development. I think that we all agree that investing in education is a good idea, but there is only one budget, and it's have its framework. What do I mean? For example, in Poland, we have a flagship program for this government, which calls 500+, 500+ for each children, which is a direct money transfer for the parents, for each children. The main problem with that kind of support is that it's ineffective. Look at this program. Around 25% of 500+ goes to the top 20% of households with the highest income level. Only around 12% goes to the poorest households. So I think it's kind of ineffective, especially that this program cost 31 billion zlotys, which is a tremendous share of Polish budget. Sorry?
Like completely, those data, this interpretation of data is false, and you have no idea what you are saying. I'm just saying.
Can you explain on that?
Because this program brought a lot of good for Polish people, especially in underdeveloped areas. And if you say that it's ineffective because middle-class people as well are getting support to raise their children, like, it's wrong. It's morally wrong what you are saying.
No, I don't think it's wrong. I think that
We can.
Okay.
This is, you know,
yes,
a panel.
I
We
see.
can discuss.
I understand, but we have to look at the costs. 31 billions of zlotys. We have to.
Okay,
we have
let's
to
look
sorry,
at the cost
let
of
me
the
finish.
banks.
Okay, let me finish. Then we have to look at on the outcomes. The program failed on the main purpose, which was the boost of the demography. It fails. Then it has, according to the costs, 31 billion zlotys, it has generally slightly effect on reducing of poverty. So the main answer is that we should select the best programs.
The best
Sir, can you just please let him finish his thought, and then we can come to you?
Okay. So my answer is that I'm not against, of course, that I'm not against social support for the poorest, for example, especially when it comes to education or so on. But I'm the supporter of the most proper programs, which are not, on the other side, the most costly programs.
Anything to add to that, or we can finish this section?
Of course, I can add a lot to that, because it was not in general. This program was planned not as a demographic support, because this is not a solution. It's not enough money. It's a start point for a basic income. Okay, but okay. You can have a mic as well. We can discuss, but please do not interrupt when I'm saying something.
Sorry.
Okay? Let's keep the discussion at the level, you know, of the panel discussion, not you know. So I do not agree with what you just said. I think even though I hate peace, like all of us probably, but I think that this program was successful, and every political party in Poland at the moment is supporting this. Maybe beside Konfederacja, but these guys are idiots, let's say. So. So I don't understand how. Have you been to the Polish seaside, for example, this year?
I'm talking about data. You are talking about some
experience. No,
experiences.
Okay.
Okay,
so
but
I can bring
we
some data.
go
I
on
can
that
bring
kind
some
of
data
level.
as well, but please do not interrupt. Okay. Let's keep this discussion on this level.
Okay. So you're finished with your part. Please, one reaction, and then we need to close this section with the questions from the audience. Okay.
Okay, so it was a question, or sorry?
No, this guy took my mic, so sorry.
Okay.
I mean,
go ahead.
We can continue this not publicly afterward.
Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead. Like short reaction, Adrian,
yes.
and then we will close this section.
Of course. I'm talking about data. So there is no There is no dispute that the program failed when it comes to boost the demography, which was the main purpose of this program, the first of all. The second is about poverty reduction. And yes, it comes about interpretation. My interpretation, when we look at the data, especially about the data on extremely poverty, the program fails. When we take under the consideration its costs, 31 billion of Polish zlotys, which is generally the great share of Polish budget, which can be, in my opinion, better invest, for example, for some interesting program in education, especially for the poor households. And that's my opinion.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm sure that we can discuss this from many different angles and also look at from many different angles. So for all of you who would like to know more about this topic, the relationship between economic freedoms and open society, I would like to ask the last question to our panelists. Please be brief. If you could recommend us maybe a book, a podcast, or a TV series or a movie on the topic that could be interesting for us, okay, good. What would you recommend? So what's on your bookshelf? We can start with Monika.
Yeah, podcasts are quite popular right now, so I would recommend the podcast. I think many people are familiar with it who are interested in economic topics, and it's called Econ Talk by Russ Roberts from the Hoover Institution, and he has some great guests on the show, and he dedicated many topics to economic freedom, so that's definitely one I would suggest.
Perfect. Alexander?
Well, the most things that are popping up in my mind are actually in Dutch, so I won't. That won't help many of us. Maybe one. But actually, I started, because of this discussion, also in preparation, I started revisiting the scholars and the philosophers that have actually inspired this discussion without many of us or many people knowing this. Karl Popper was mentioned already. To go back to the basics, because this is what we often forget, and put them in the current, in the past context, and then take them to the present. This is something that I've been doing in the past few days, and actually it refreshed my minds since I last looked at all these things like 20 years ago, when the context and political space in Europe was totally different. So look at it again and see the warning signs. I think this is the most important. And then this morning I was listening again, and this is on YouTube, was actually Soros talking about economic freedoms and open society, which was inspiring, probably the inspiration of this panel anyway, the topic. 45 minutes on YouTube, fantastic speech. I think there was much to learn from that as well. So that will be my tip.
Okay, go on YouTube. Miłosz?
I think I would recommend you some fiction, something to just to enjoy after Freedom Games once you're back at your homes in the evening. The show that I really love is the HBO show Succession. I think it's not
Signs of approval from the others.
Yeah, so it's not about Karl Popper, it's not about philosophy, it's not about economy. There's a lot about economy, but I think it shows what happens when the institutions are weak and when companies are super strong. So it's kind of a warning sign from America. I love the show. The third season is coming up, so I recommend the Succession HBO.
Tanja?
Yes, I would recommend something that touches on our panel, as well as the first question from the audience, which is a book from Deidre McCloskey, Why Liberalism Works, with a subtitle, I believe, How True Liberal Values Produce, let me remember correctly, freer, more equal, and prosperous world for all. So it's a long read, but I highly recommend that.
Well, I'm at the same position that I just read a book by a Hungarian author, so it wouldn't be that useful to the audience. Maybe online we have some Hungarian followers, so I will just state the title. It's called Zara, and it's a family novel about a Jewish family starting in Germany in the 1930s, and it follows the family's life, or at least the surviving members of the family's life to to 2014 or something like that. And it's very interesting because, of course, we start with the horrors of the Second World War. Changes, after the World War, how they fit into another country. It touches on immigrant rights, it touches on women's rights, economic freedom as well. So it really covers a lot of aspects of what we just talked about right now. And I was just reading it. And just to give another English example, I'm a big fan of a podcast called Hacks on Tap, which is produced by two American political scientists. One of them worked for the Obama administration and for a Democratic president, and the other one is a Republican, not a Trumpist Republican, but another kind of Republican. And of course, they discuss everything that's going on in U.S. politics, from Afghanistan to the elections and all the current issues. And it's very interesting from a Hungarian point of view, where we don't have a lot of political debate. It's very interesting to hear both sides discussing these issues.
Yeah, Adrian.
Okay, thank you very much. All the great recommendations, for example, the McCluskey books are great recommendations as well. So I would like to recommend you some paper research. I know it maybe sounds boring, paper research.
Oh no!
but believe me, it's very interesting and well written. The populist leaders and the economy, which shows that populist governments harm both personal freedoms. It gives evidence that populist governments harms both economy and the personal rights. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, I hope that our discussion and also your recommendations helped our audience to get enough food for thought. And also, I want to thank you, Monika, Alexander, Miłosz, Tanja, Andrea, and Adrian, for sharing your insights. I also want to thank you watching us online for being here with us, and you, the audience here in Łódź. I would also like to invite you to stay with the Freedom Games. So at 1:45 here in the Sky Room, you can join the discussion panel called "Are Technologies Driving Us into the Cold War?" ? Or you can check the Freedom Games program for more information on the upcoming panels, authors, meetings, or lectures. Thank you, and stay safe.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it. And how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Ihre Ausreise
You may now kiss the bride.
Work is different now. We're commuting less, virtually meeting more. Separating work life and life can feel challenging. It's easy to forget that to thrive at work, we need to take care of ourselves. Microsoft Viva Insights offers new experiences to balance productivity and well-being. Personal insights help you stay at your best and most productive. Add structure to your remote workday by opting for a virtual commute, carving out time to have a productive start in the morning and mindfully disconnect in the evening. Protect time before your calendar fills up for focused work, coaching, and learning. Take regular mental breaks with Headspace, tapping into dedicated moments of mindfulness. Use emotional check-ins to tune into your day-to-day mindset and well-being. Strengthen team bonds with Stay Connected experiences that prompt you to praise collaborators, schedule one-on-ones, and follow up on pending commitments and outstanding tasks. Insights for managers and leaders offer windows into how work happens and the impact on employee well-being. Identify where teams may be isolated and take action to break down silos. Quickly discover opportunities to prevent burnout, promote coaching and development, and boost engagement. You and your team's well-being is important, especially in times of change. Taking care of one another allows you to thrive and your organization to build resilience. Experience how new well-being insights in Viva can help.
Liberté Talks to co ważne. Seria Liberté Talks realizowana jest dzięki wsparciu Google oraz Państwa darowizną. Na podcast z Klimatem zaprasza Jakub Wiech.